For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Shannon de Rehove. I'm at the ISS speaking to Ottilia Maunganidze to discuss the current situation in Libya following the death of Muammar Gaddafi. South Africa and the African Union have seemed totally impotent with regard to influencing the Libyan transition. Why is this, and is this a major setback for South Africa and the African Union?
I don't think you need to consider it as a major setback for South Africa and the African Union, because ideally what happens in Libya and how the situation is resolved is up to the Libyans. And so whether South Africa and the African Union cannot influence what's going on the ground is, in my opinion, neither here nor there. It is up to the Libyan people to decide their future. Of course, there have been concerns that have been raised by South Africa and the African Union with regards to the way in which the Libyan crisis has been dealt with. From the beginning, they would have wanted a political solution, a negotiated political settlement, but the parties to the conflict at the time, the Libyan government, headed by Muammar Gaddafi, was not particularly interested in negotiating peace, and as a result of that, the conflict exacerbated, and the options open to South Africa and the African Union became less and less because they couldn't bring Gaddafi to the negotiating table.
The Arab Spring seems to be taking a grisly turn with the killing of Gaddafi. What is your prediction for democracy in the Arab world?
Well, each country is different and each country has its own context. For Libya, I think the main thing now is to move forward, to look towards national reconciliation. Other countries that have gone through the Arab Spring and have come out of it, Tunisia, which was the beginning of the Arab Spring, and Egypt seem to be progressing pretty well. Tunisia recently ratified the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, and even more recently held its first democratic elections. And so that is just one positive thing that has come out of the Arab Spring. Likewise, in Egypt, the former president is being prosecuted for crimes as well as for corruption charges. And so I think from what has happened so far, we can safely say that the Arab Spring has given some positive outcome. Obviously, the death of Gaddafi is somewhat a negative outcome, because ideally you wouldn't want for anyone to be killed, irrespective of what they have, what crimes they may have committed. But if the track record is anything to go by, there is some hope that Libya will follow the example of both Egypt and Tunisia and hopefully become a democratic state.
The killing of Muammar Gaddafi has brought to a close 8 months of civil war in Libya, but also threatens to lay bare the regional and tribal rivalries that present the National Transitional Council with its biggest challenge. Please elaborate.
Well, I like to refer to them as perceived regional and tribal divisions, because most of them were actually as a result of the way in which Gaddafi governed the country. A lot of the perceived divisions are actually non-existent, or they're not as great as they were many years ago. However, the way in which Gaddafi's government, controlled the country was they played a lot on, tribalism. But that is not to say that, the incoming government will treat matters in the same way. A few weeks ago, there were a lot of video footage of NTC fighters as well as people in support of the National Transitional Council holding up banners saying no to tribalism. So at the very least, the people of Libya are not particularly interested in reverting to a state of tribalism. And the society has evolved over the past 42 years. It's moved away from being mostly a rural society to a more urban society, a more youthful urban society. And so the tribalism that existed many years ago, in which, you know, the tribal heads, the chiefs, were integral in political life, not so much. Libya is now more of governed by economic interests rather than political or social interests governed by tribalism. So I think there is some hope that the tribalism that has dogged Libya for many years will not be part of the new emerging Libya.
After Gaddafi was killed, the rebels put his body on show while they argued over what to do with it. Why was this done, and what effect could it have on the country?
I can only speculate as to why they did it, and I think one of the reasons why they did it was because they wanted the people to see that Gaddafi is indeed dead. One of the reasons possibly is because earlier this year the National Transitional Council came out saying that they had seized Saif al-Islam, Gaddafi's son, and only for him to emerge a few days later to say, no, actually I was not captured. So I think they were trying to actually show that indeed what the news reports are saying is actually what has happened. What it says for Libya's future, I don't think there's much of a link really between people going to view a body and what it says for how they will deal with the country going forward. What it can say though is that they have gotten rid at least of one of the elements of, you know, the past 42 years of Gaddafi's rule, and for them it marks a new era in which there is no in which Gaddafi is not in power. But we will see in the coming weeks and months as to how the death of Gaddafi has really affected the people of Libya.
The United Nations Human Rights Office has called for a probe into Muammar Gaddafi's death to determine whether he was killed during fighting or after his capture. Why is this necessary to determine, and what are the consequences of the findings?
A commission of inquiry, especially into the death of a head of state, is always important. It's important because it helps to establish the true facts that occurred on the day. It also helps where, for example, in the case of Gaddafi, where he was willfully killed, it will help to bring to book those people who committed the crime. So just like any death, where anyone is murdered, where anyone is killed, it's important for there to be an investigation. Obviously, because he was a former head of state, a formal commission of inquiry is important, and it's also because a lot of the news reports have been giving conflicting stories, primarily based on the fact that people have been coming forward with different stories as to what happened, whether or not he was willfully killed by one of the NTC fighters, or whether or not he died as a result of crossfire. So it is important to establish the facts before anything can be done. The commission of inquiry, once set up, will obviously have to investigate what really happened, and thereafter they will make recommendations as to how to proceed. It will be a great test for the National Transitional Council how they proceed with this matter, because this is their first test to show whether they are actually fair and whether they will follow due process. If they do follow due process and act according to international law principles, then it will be their first success as the transitional government.
Well, thank you very much for your insight.
Thank you.